Okay, so this is our third Stasis video, but I really do feel for my PvE players because I feel like in yesterday's video when talking about all the Stasis changes, I didn't really even talk about you guys, and I'm sorry. Looking at the multitude of patch notes though, a lot of them did target players versus player. However, there was some overlap, and that was something that we got to avoid, I think, in the previous nerfs and patches that came out. A lot of times Bungie will come out and just issue a change just affecting player versus player, and they'll even say it in something like reduced knockback versus players. However, in this most recent patch, yes, there was a lot of these changes that overlapped inside of PvE, meaning I think the overall power fantasy that Stasis once had inside of PvE has diminished greatly, and I completely understand PvE players and their frustration. Take for instance how the Storm, where they reduce angle of initial freezing, the Crystal Creation, or Cryoclasm, where that sprint before activation also bleeds over into PvE, meaning whatever neutral game build you were utilizing before, and I even mentioned it yesterday, yes, it does require more setup, a little more thought to it, but that is not a positive for PvE. That takes away from the power fantasy inside of PvE. Now, before I go any further, I do want to mention, I think the other day, Bungie had said that Stasis changes were going to come again for PvE players, maybe a buff. I can't even track down the thread. Maybe that's just a rumor. Regardless, I want to point out to why there was more overlap in these patch notes than there were in previous patches. And that's simply because Bungie did rush to get these changes out. We know that these changes were not meant for this season. They were meant for next season. By the way, I'm not making excuses for the Sandbox team, but I can imagine they were kind of put in a sticky situation where they had to make a change now. Considering things like hashtag nerf Stasis was trending, yeah, which is why there was so much overlap there. Hence why I think some of the changes were a little too hard. And look, I'm singling out Behemoth here. I know Behemoth has some playmaking potential, but you know that things are a little too hard when they go in there and they nerf Cryoclasm and Howl of the Storm, and they drop the damage resistance for Glacial Quake from 50% to 47%, and that bleeds over. Not that that really matters inside of PvE, but it still bleeds over. Now, notice the top there, it says that they reduce the heavy slam vertical freeze versus players. So again, Bungie can separate things, but it is something more difficult when you actually change the fundamentals of an ability. Now, I don't understand the damage resist. Maybe the 50% to 47% doesn't actually bleed over inside of PvE. Hard to test, right? But when you start changing fundamentals like Cryoclasm, Howl of the Storm, take Withering Blade, for instance, where they reduce the projectile speed by 10% or reduce tracking after bouncing off a walls, that bleeds over, despite there being so many of these changes only targeting player versus player. Cold Snap Grenades, a general Stasis ability. All of these things, which are great things that targeted PvP, also affected it inside of PvE. Things like not tracking after initial target acquisition, the increase there in arming duration, you get the picture. Probably the biggest one that I think most PvE players unanimously are mad about is Whisper of Hedrons. This fragment, which used to give you a damage bonus inside of PvE, now only buffs things like weapon stability and aim assist, mobility, resilience, recovery. Nice changes overall. Something that I think I may even utilize still when I do rock Stasis inside of PvE, but the damage buff was nice, and I know there are other ways to get a damage buff inside of PvE. You got high energy fire, and Hedrons and high energy fire did not stack together. However, if you were like me, you would rely on Hedrons as your rollover buff and then spec out Charge with Light for other areas, maybe Protective Light, or maybe you wanted to rock a Warmont Cell build. Hedrons gave us more options. To me, this change to Hedrons though was Bungie's way of singling Hedrons out for both PvE and for PvP, because Bungie knew what we were doing, and we know that a nerf is coming for either Charge with Light mods or Warmont Cell mods. I'm just letting you know, guys. I think before Witch Queen, we could potentially see a nerf hitting all those things. But I just want to level with you guys real quickly because I understand the frustration here and understand where PvE players are coming from. Bungie makes these supers and subclasses super potent when an expansion releases. And then after that, we've seen it with the Forsaken supers, things get dialed back. And Forsaken supers got absolutely slapped. Now, we have seen a resurgence. Take, for instance, Code of the Missile Titan with our Yeet Exotic. That overnight turned that subclass into an S-tier subclass for PvE, simply because the damage output was just so good. So there is hope that the power fantasy that you once had with some of your favorite Stasis subclasses will resurface again in the future and be just as powerful. But I understand the frustration because it almost feels like you're working backwards. You get something super powerful, super potent. It gets dialed back, dialed back, dialed back, just to wait for an exotic down the line that'll be able to make it more potent. However, that was the case with our current light subclasses. Guys, I feel like the only solution, the only way for Bungie to truly make this work, to make PvE players happy and PvP players happy, is to just take advantage of the aspects and fragments and its layouts that Bungie presented us in Beyond Light. And that's simply to just start locking fragments and aspects. Imagine if Hedrons didn't get a nerf, but instead became a PvE only fragment. Or you had the first half of the fragment readout stating all these benefits like increasing weapon stability, aim assist, mobility, yada yada. And then at the bottom, you could put under it that Hedrons increases weapon damage inside of PvE or against combatants, right? Because that's normally how Bungie separates things. When they say combatants, they're talking about PvE. When they say players, they're talking about PvP. I know sometimes it doesn't actually work out that way because wording can be hard. But the only way that I can feel like Bungie can go in here, considering that they have this genius layout of our subclasses, where you're essentially creating your own subclass. They're just giving us a bunch of fragments and a bunch of aspects, and they're like, go have fun, go play. It's this customization I really like. I think the next step for Bungie to really allow PvE players and PvP players to harmoniously thrive together is to allow certain fragments to be locked to PvE and certain aspects to be locked to PvP, and vice versa. For instance, Cryoclasm, which just got a nerf, where it requires that sprint time for activation, as well as Howl the Storm, which also got a nerf, and its freeze radius, as well as its angle cone. Again, guys, what if Bungie just gave us an aspect down the road, which literally combines Cryoclasm and Howl the Storm together? One aspect, remove the sprint activation, buff Howl the Storm, two aspects in one, and make it for PvE only. Again, guys, this is the only way I could think of to allow PvE players to still hang on to the power fantasy that, by the way, they had in previous sandboxes, while simultaneously allowing for PvP players to not get frozen over and over again inside of Crucible. And look, had this been any other subclass other than Stasis, most PvP players would probably be okay with it. The fact is, no PvP game likes people getting frozen. It's just not fun. At the same time, though, there's a lot of PvE only players in this game, and this is the only solution I can think of. And we even talked about it in the video yesterday, essentially when I went over that everything here can completely change in the next sandbox when new fragments and aspects come out. And that's the thing, all these nerfs that just got handed out to Stasis can potentially be undone with the inclusion of a new fragment or aspect down the road, because they can be so powerful. Take, for instance, Touch of Winter this past season, right? So in my opinion, I think that the only way to preserve this, and this isn't just for Stasis, this is for all future subclasses that finally make their way inside of Destiny 2. The only way to allow for a balanced PvP and a nasty power fantasy PvE is to just lock fragments and aspects to those activities. The only gray area here is Gambit, because Gambit has a combination of both PvE and PvP, where invaders can invade and attack other players. And if that really is what's keeping Bungie here from separating the fragments, because they would interlock there inside of Gambit, by God, Bungie has stated in the past that they want a seamless world where your abilities feel the same whether you're playing PvE and PvP. And that is a very beautiful vision. And probably from a sandbox perspective, it's probably much easier having that one-to-one across all activities. But something's gonna give. PvP just had to take the brunt of it for the past 6-7 months. And now PvE is starting to feel that pain. So guys, let me know in the comments below what you think. In a perfect world, you're right. Everything should just be separated, yada yada. But again, how do you go about separating? To me, the fragment and aspect separation, the lockout between PvE and PvP, I think is the only solution. The only problem is Bungie will have to make more aspects. They'll have to make more fragments. Do I see anything that I'm saying actually coming to fruition? No, I don't, guys. I just don't. It's a novel idea, but I don't see it happening. Just like I don't see light subclasses getting the updates that our Stasis subclass layout has now. We're at the point where Witch Queen is on the horizon. Bungie's main focus is shipping that expansion, and at this point, they're just trying to put the fires out that Stasis caused from Beyond Light. Let me know in the comments below what you think, guys. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.